Welcome back to the Munk Center, everybody, and joining us now on the debate to talk about the province's new Open Ontario plan. There's Janet Ecker. She's a former finance minister for the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario. Mark Winfield is a professor at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University, and Janice Stein is the director of this Munk Center. And if you couldn't get down here tonight, just a reminder, Mike Miner, our fifth column blogger, is online at tvo.org/the agenda. He's moderating an online chat in case you want to weigh in on the issues you're hearing about here tonight. Also, after 9 p.m. Eastern Time, after we're finished on television, we're going online. If you've got comments or questions you want to put to our three guests tonight, dial us up and chime in. We're ready to take those comments and questions from you now, and we'll put them to our guests online after 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Just before I show the highlights of the throne speech and the so-called Open Ontario plan, let me give you a word.
I asked you just for a moment. I do want to apologize to the minister, to all the viewers of TV Ontario for the disruption. We at the Munk Centre at the University of Toronto are absolutely committed to a civil, open debate, and disrupting speech is not part of that tradition of civility. They were not our students. Our students are here, and they do not engage in that kind of behavior. But nevertheless, I apologize both to our viewers and to the minister for the disruption.
You know what I think happened? I think they thought Ann Coulter was going to be here tonight.
Well,
anyway.
Wrong meeting.
Wrong meeting, yeah, it was only Dwight Duncan. Okay, Michael, let's roll this board here. Here's the Open Ontario plan, first unveiled in the March 8th throne speech by the McGuinty government. It's a 5-year plan, and during that time, the government says it'll turn Ontario into the clean water technology capital of the world. Conference Board of Canada saying this is a $400 billion a year industry that doubles in value every 5 to 6 years, and Ontario wants to be #1. It will encourage the mining of chromite in Northern Ontario's so-called Ring of Fire. That's 240 kilometers west of James Bay, chromite being the essential ingredient in stainless steel, and there are no other North American producers. Government will work with industry partners to turn Toronto into a global financial leader. Ontario's finance sector supporting 625,000 jobs. And finally, something we just heard a bit about, the plan will increase the enrollment of international students in Ontario's post-secondary institutions by 50%. Let's go around the horn on this. Okay, Janet Ecker, as an approach, what do you think?
Well, I think they need to focus very much on what they can do in terms of a plan for Ontario's economy, because the province is going through some very difficult times. We're seeing our manufacturing base decline quite seriously. We're shifting to a service-based economy, and I think that having a plan, taking a look at what they want to do and where they want to go in the long term, it is a good approach. I mean, you might, and you can certainly get agreements and disagreements about the pieces of it. One of the focuses I think is very good in it, and as president of the Toronto Financial Services Alliance, I would think so, absolutely, because I think the financial services is one of the growing strengths of this economy. It's a foundation, good quality jobs, high paying jobs, good anchors for other jobs. Okay. So I think that's a good focus.
You were here to speak to the financial piece. We want you here tonight to speak to the environmental piece of it. Mark, what do you say?
I think I agree with Janet that there's a need for an overall economic strategy for the province, particularly in light of the kind of structural economic changes that we've been experiencing. When we look at the environmental dimensions, though, of Open Ontario, I think there are some very profound contradictions.
Such as?
Well, on the one hand, we've had the emphasis on the Green Energy Act, on clean water, and on the other hand, this sort of strange focus on mining in Northern Ontario.
What's so strange about it?
Well, it's the sector has been in decline for many years in terms of employment, in terms of economic contribution. But I think the bigger contradiction is that on the one hand, you have this emphasis on green technology, value-added manufacturing, the sort of economy of the future sort of stuff, and then this sort of vestige from 1910 that we want to have a staking rush in Northern Ontario, which just doesn't compute from several different perspectives. One needs to keep in mind, too, that at this stage it's a very speculative discussion, but the potential trade-offs in the north are also, I think, very significant and need some very careful thought before we go down that path.
More on that in a bit. Janice.
I actually think this is both a gutsy and a smart approach, Steve. What Janet and Mike just said, we are in the process of structural change in the Ontario economy. It's not business as usual. And the big vision here, the details we can all argue about, but the big vision is Ontario needs to be open. It needs to bring people here, bring students here.
You think that's a good idea?
I think that's absolutely the right idea for Ontario. There's an emphasis on high-value manufacturing as the jobs of the future, on financial services. There's the good part of the environmental agenda, which is the green tech and the water technology. I think the government, the vectors of this are absolutely right, and it's gutsy because it's saying to Ontarians, this time is different.
Okay, let me follow up with this on the international student issue. I talked to a couple of Conservative MPPs at Queen's Park who wanted to know, because the details are still sketchy, who wanted to know, are we going to favor students from some countries, or perhaps the converse being, are we going to be a little more careful about the students we bring in from countries that, let's say, have a reputation for terrorism right now?
You know,
any concerns about that?
Well, I don't have any, but there's certainly, and there have been no indications from the government that that's in fact its approach. What I would hope, and the details are not yet done, but what I would hope is, one, an emphasis on quality. Because the minister said we have some really great universities and we're leaders.
And we know all that, but what about the security concerns? That's what these guys were getting at.
Well, I don't think that is an unusual problem in any sense of the word. When you get really terrific students who are qualified, motivated, and our embassies, in fact, do the visas, I don't think that that's an issue for this
Janet,
province at all.
what do you think about that?
Well, I think getting into Canada, whether you're coming to work, whether you're coming to be a student, whether you're coming to be a tourist, whatever, there need to be rules and limits and security checks. I mean,
Which
that's
are
a
already
normal
in
thing,
place.
and they're there. So I think, I mean, I can understand people's concern and fear. I mean, there are things that are happening out there that didn't used to happen. But I think the initiative is good. I think if it's well executed, I think it will help us in a global economy. I mean, one of the strengths that we have in this region, in a number of sectors, but certainly in the financial sector, is the quality of the talent. And one of the things about that talent that global players, global companies will tell you is the diversity of the workforce here, the people with cultural, language, experiential ties around the world with other cultures, other countries. But not only that, and I was speaking to one of the consular corps the other day who came from a country in Europe who's just been here in Toronto for a couple of months, and he said to me, he said, it works. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you've got all this diversity here, all these different races, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, it seems to work. How do you do that? So lots of cities have diverse populations. We seem to have diverse, talented populations that are able to work together productively in the economy. So I think that's a strength, and I think the International Student Initiative has the potential to help build that strength.
Okay. Michael, let me just alert you. I want to go to the top of page 12. Let's go to because we lost a bit of time with the protest off the top, and I want to go right to the Ring of Fire stuff, because Mark, you brought up some concerns you have. Dwight Duncan in the legislature earlier today from his budget speech on the Ring of Fire. Roll tape, please.
For the 21st century, the discovery of chromite used to make stainless steel in the Ring of Fire could be as big as the discovery of nickel was in the 19th century. We are fully committed to working with Aboriginal peoples and all Northern Ontarians to build on the Ring of Fire's significant potential.
Okay, we keep hearing about this so-called Ring of Fire, and no, it is not the Johnny Cash, June Carter song that everybody knows. This is an area about 240 kilometers west of James Bay. It is way up there in northern Ontario, and there are literally thousands upon thousands of potential mining stakes going on there right now for this chromite, which apparently is used in stainless steel, and it's the best, maybe only, deposit in North America that does this. Now, Mark, I know the Premier said a month ago that we got to start to make our way in the world, not by pulling stuff out of the ground, but using our wits and our brains and all of that. But then he also said in the throne speech a couple of weeks ago, and then again in the budget today, this is our future, people. Mining, good old-fashioned mining, pulling stuff out of the ground that people are going to pay a lot of money for. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, I think, as I said, I think there's a bit of a contradiction here in terms of what is the message that you're sending about the path of the economy into the future. Are we precisely heading into knowledge service-based activities, high value-added manufacturing, green technology, or are we in the commodity resource extraction business again?
Well, can you not be in both?
You can, but I think there's a distinction in terms of emphasis. I also think there's some very serious questions about the desirability of going down that path in the far north. And we have to keep in mind that this is all completely speculative at this stage of the game.
Right.
These are very isolated locations. We don't actually know the nature of the resource. But we
You're
need
going to
to
forgive
keep
this
in
question,
mind,
though. You're going to forgive this question. We just got back from Timmins, so
Yeah.
we can plead
Yeah.
guilty to being a little influenced by
Yeah.
all of what just transpired while we were up there. People need work.
Yeah.
And they think environmentalists who live in the South who never get up there are talking through their hats and don't know what's going on. They're losing jobs by the hundreds, by the thousands up there, and they're excited about the potential of this. And you sound like a killjoy to them right now.
I'm saying be cautious. Keep in mind that what we're probably looking at would be a relatively temporary boom. I mean, the average lifetime for new mines in Canada is getting very, very short, typically less than 15, indeed less than 10 years. So you're not looking necessarily at a very long-term set of economic activities. It would be a fly-in, fly-out type operation given the location.
Let me get
Potentially
Janice' view on
very
that.
high impacts. I think particularly for the First Nations communities need to consider, they need to make their own decisions here, but they do need to consider very carefully the nature of some of the trade-offs that might be involved.
Okay, when you were the Minister of Finance and you looked at the mining numbers, how big a deal is mining? No, we don't think about it much here in Southern Ontario, but how big a deal to the overall picture of the province is mining?
Well, it is a big deal, and I mean, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, or even 5 years, if you're in Northern Ontario, this is a chance, this is an opportunity. And yes, you need rules, and you need to be careful, and environmental controls, all of those are very, very, very important. And quite frankly, this country does a pretty darn good job in that area, I would say. We certainly have room for improvement, but we do a good job. So I think the exploring economic opportunity in the north is really, really important. But it's not just the mine in the ground. It's the expertise and the people that help do that help sell that help finance that. Canada, Ontario, our exchange here in Toronto is one of the leaders in mining, metals, and energy financing and trading and listings on the stock exchange. It's a job driver in a whole range of areas within financial services as well. So yes, part of it is pulling things out of the ground, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we've done well on that. We can continue to do well on that, but that's not the only thing we do. But it is part of a bigger financial services cluster that is also very much part of the economy in this province.
Let me put that to Janice then. Do you worry that this takes our eye off the brand that we're trying to sell to the world, which is that we're the smarter post-secondary education, service-oriented brand?
I really don't see it in the sense that we need to bridge from where we are to where we're going. And I think this is right, Mike, that this is maybe 10, 15, 20 years. It's a bridge at best. And Janet is making a crucial point. When we talk about mining, we tend to focus on what's in the ground. But the Toronto Stock Exchange, for instance, which is, and Toronto is the largest financial services sector in this country, is largely known globally for its mining, its financing of mining, its energy. That's in fact where Canada leads in global financial services. We have to build from the base on which we lead and move up the value chain.
And there's technology. I mean,
Yeah.
mining today
Yeah.
is not a bunch of guys with picks and shovels anymore. There's a lot of high tech that is involved in good productive mining.
And
So-
environmentally responsible mining.
and
too.
environmentally responsible mining.
Well, let me get that marked. Is that true? Is there environmentally responsible mining going on?
That's a matter of some debate. I mean, the industry is in a sense the epitome of unsustainability by definition. There is some question, yes, if you can translate the capital that you might generate by realizing the resource into investments into a longer term and more diversified economic strategy in a region, there may be some justification for proceeding down that path. It's not clear that's necessarily what would happen in Northern Ontario. I do think the region probably needs to be looking in other directions in terms of the longer term economic structure of the region, in terms of where employment is going to come from and where economic activity is going to come from. I don't think it's going to be from mining. The sector has been in long-term decline in terms of contributions to GDP and to employment. There would be a temporary boom. We're sort of getting a little bit of that with the diamond mine on the James Bay coastline. But I don't think it lays the foundation for the long term. And at the same time, one needs to be very conscious of the trade-offs that are involved here. The boreal is a very, very high-value ecological system. It's extremely fragile. It's subject to a lot of stress already because of climate change and other factors. And the bigger concern that's being raised here is also that the mineral development component seems to be proceeding absent any kind of overall plan for the region. The Premier has talked about protecting 50%, but there doesn't seem to be anything happening on that front at the same time. And this has been part of the concern, is that yes, maybe mineral development makes sense in some locations, but that needs to happen in the context of a broader planning framework for this landscape.
Okay, let me go to Janet on this for starters, and again, as a former finance minister, I want to bring your experience to bear on this question. The McGuinty government has made a decision on how to attract business here, and part of that calculation is to put significant public dollars into luring other companies to come here. You know, Samsung, a $7 billion deal, but lots of public investment from the Ontario taxpayer. Ubisoft, this video games maker, a $250 million plus subsidy investment, use the language you like, in order to get them to come and create, I think, just a few hundred jobs in Toronto, 800 jobs in Toronto, I'm told. $70 million for Toyota for skills training for their plant in Woodstock. I'm going to use inflammatory language here, but you'll get where I'm coming from. Are we in a world today where you got to bribe people to come and set up jobs here?
Well, it's two things. One, I think the first priority is to make sure that you get the competitive landscape here in Ontario right. So you want good competitive taxes. You want a good regulatory environment. You want good quality talent, good quality of life. There's a whole range of things that you need to do to build your value proposition that is sustainable and that works. Then when you get down to company by company, industry by industry, whatever, it's a competitive world out there, and unfortunately, there are a lot of jurisdictions out there who are bending a lot of rules, who are spending a lot of money, who are bribing a lot of folks, if I can use your term, to get the jobs here. So I'll let.
If we don't do it, they will, and we'll lose.
I think the judgment has to be used, and I'll let others with more expertise on Samsung and some of the other issues say whether it's a good or a bad investment. But I think to take an approach that says we'll just set the competitive environment, sit back, and everybody will wander in our door is a little naive too.
Doesn't work that way anymore?
It doesn't work that way anymore. Okay. So it's a tough call.
I agree with Janet. I mean, and actually, let me push it just a little bit further, because we've actually created a competitive environment here in Ontario and in Canada. You know, we've lowered taxes, which was an argument that was made for years and years. Our corporate taxes are now significantly lower than south of the border. And the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, made a really interesting statement just 2 days ago. He said, what's wrong is we are not getting the investment from the corporate side. We have the investment from the government side. We're not getting the businesses in this country and in this province are not stepping up to invest in new green technology, in new R&D.
What are they waiting for?
Well, you know, one argument is they are wholly spooked by the recession, and they're still sitting on capital that they have, and they're not yet prepared to invest. I think I'm not persuaded. I think there's a tradition of standing back and waiting. Governor Carney said, you know, you see companies in other parts of the world now scooping up bargains globally that are on the table, and Canadian companies are not in the game. I think that's a big part of the problem, and it's a cultural problem.
Mark.
What worries me a bit about Samsung and some of the other things that you mentioned are the extent to which they're sort of one-offs. That we sort of grab something here, we grab something there, but they don't seem to me to be part of any kind of overall strategy for some of these sectors in terms of what are the pieces that we need to bring together to build competitive advantage, to build long-term employment, value added. The financial services task force is kind of slightly different in the sense it's been an effort to develop something more of a sectoral strategy, but it's much more comprehensive, much more strategic. But we're not seeing that in these other sectors. The energy piece is sort of we go one way one day, we're writing multi-billion-dollar blank checks for nuclear power refurbishments one day, and we're trying to do Samsung another, and the contradictions are kind of read externally. But more generally, there's a whole range of different things that one would want to see happening in some of these sectors simultaneously if you want to really build competitive advantage in them, and we're not seeing that. This thing is, in my mind, more my concern with the Open Ontario strategy is that kind of more strategic integration information in terms of economic strategy for particular sectors that we want to build as winners just isn't there, with a few exceptions.
So help me on this, Janet. Is it really old-style thinking to say, we've got a fantastic location here because we're right next to the biggest market in the world. We've got a pretty good healthcare system here in a way that they maybe until 2 days ago didn't have in the United States.
Still don't have.
Still don't have. Okay. We've got a very well-educated jurisdiction here as well. Isn't that enough competitive advantage to obviate the need to spend all this money to kind of bribe companies to come here?
If we just sit here, it's the old, build it and they will come, just
Yeah.
doesn't work in the global economy of today. You've got to be out there banging on doors. You've got to be out there selling your value proposition. You've got to be in the offices, in the rooms, convincing people that this is the place to go. And there have been times when I think governments of all political stripes have had to put some incentive in place, whether it's infrastructure, training assistance.
Can you name me, for instance, when you were finance minister, did you do anything like this?
No, I didn't. There wasn't anything that I did along these lines. But
I'm trying to find a real-world example of where we spent this much, these are the jobs we got, and therefore we can prove that the investment was worth what we put into it.
Well, the other thing that I think you have to look at, and again, in terms of the Samsung, and I'll just, what the government is saying, and I'll defer to Mark's expertise here on this, but what they're also trying to say is they're trying to build a cluster of certain technology. And so, yes, they are taking a gamble, investing some money to try and build something that they hope will grow and become self-sustaining. So you can't sort of say, okay, well, it's X number of jobs with this company, therefore that's it. And if it works, you're going to have a bigger cluster. And what the government is claiming is that there's already been other companies and other investments promised or being considered to piggyback on what they're doing with things like Samsung. So if that works, and again, it may not work, if that works, it may well have been worth the investment.
Yeah, and just to follow on what Janet said, what we do know about how jobs are created and why business relocates or chooses to come here rather than there is if there's already a business that's working. We know a couple of things. So clusters, innovation actually happens in clusters, not in isolation. And what the government is trying to do, as you said, Janet, is to create a cluster. It comes where there's a diverse workforce, which we have in Ontario, and we're almost uniquely privileged, frankly. And it comes where you have a culture that is open to innovation, willing to take a little risk. Here's where we could do a little better.
Mark.
That's true.
That said, I think if you're trying to build a cluster, you need more than just a Samsung deal.
You do.
And
Yeah,
this is I think
that.
the critical component is that there are a number of different fronts we need to be moving on simultaneously, be it in post-secondary education, be it in research and development, be it on some of the policy side on energy as well. And we just don't have those pieces brought together. In the NDP government, for example, one of the things that people did note about it was it actually did have an explicit strategy around trying to develop particular clusters and sectors. One of the collateral losses of the common sense revolution was that idea kind of fell by the wayside. But it seems to me that's the kind of thing that we need to try and.
Did you see her face when you said
well, it's
I'm going to demand equal time here. We better look at it.
But fair enough. But I do think that particular dimension of what that government was trying to do did get quite a bit of attention. And I think precisely because they were trying to make some of these connections within the clusters that we need to have happen for what we need to do, and we're not quite getting that at this stage.
One of the fundamental things, one of the fundamental
yeah.
things that our government did is that we changed the culture around.
You were part of the Harris government.
Yes, I was part of the Harris government. I confess, I was part of the Harris government. I'm sitting on a campus. I understand that can be a risky thing to do some days.
Look at our polite students.
That's right. Look at it. Yeah. But no, one of the things that we did was change the culture around taxation, to look at it as a really valuable tool to drive growth and attracting investment. And I had to smile when I was sitting listening to Minister Duncan today in the legislature when he was doing the budget, and he was talking about how they were making changes on corporation tax and business tax and personal tax and all the jobs that was going to create. And I was sitting there going, finally, it's worked. Mike Harris is right. But competitive taxation is really important, and I think that it does help attract jobs. It does help all of us out there who work hard to get the benefits of that. So it is part of, not the only thing, but it is part of a good economic strategy.
You know, I don't really have much time left, Steve, but let me come back to the strategy around post-secondary education, which we didn't talk very much about. Long-term investment is, in fact, opening our universities to the very best and brightest students from around the world. Putting, as you said earlier, putting the supports in place to help these students. The Australian model is not actually great because when students came to Australia, they did not get the support they needed to succeed. I think we have a unique opportunity here to build bridges to the world,
So
to bring the world
when we
to
open
us.
our doors, do you want them to stay here or do you want them to go home?
You know what? That's kind of, to me, an outdated question because they go home, they come back. They have friends here, they work together with the friends. The people here go there and the people there come here, and that's how you effectively build Ontario as a hub economy.
But I do think that the theme that was raised by the question earlier is really quite crucial in terms of helping these people with these students with the transition into Ontario and into Ontario universities. That's going to be absolutely essential to making this succeed.
Okay, that's got to be the last word. Sorry, Janice, usually you get the last word in your home, but
That's
Mark gets it
perfectly
today.
fine.
Mark Winfield from York University, Janice Stein from the University of Toronto, Janet Ecker, the former Ontario PC Finance Minister. Thanks, all three of you, for joining us for what was a more eventful night than we had counted on, but there you go. That's what happens. Thanks to the members of this audience as well for hanging in there. We appreciate your taking time out of your schedule to be with us this evening as well.